With me on the program this morning, Parliamentary Secretary to the Prime Minister, Josh Frydenberg, and the Parliamentary Secretary to the Shadow Treasurer, Ed Husic. Gentlemen, good morning to you. Josh, can you see the point that Ian McPhedran's making there, that if soldiers are there and in combat, why don't we just simply call them boots on the ground, ground forces?
Well, they're not combat troops on the ground per se in terms of battalions and the like. They are military advisors to the Peshmerga and to the Iraqi military. And I think it's worth pointing out, Kieran, that when General Dempsey appeared before that Senate Armed Services Committee alongside Chuck Hagel, he did say he wasn't making a recommendation to the President to send combat troops into Iraq. And that is the current position of the United States government, and it's certainly the position of the Australian government. But I want to point out to your viewers that there's an indivisibility about Australia's security on the one hand and what is transpiring in the Middle East, and particularly in Iraq and Syria. Unless we take action as part of this multinational coalition over there in Iraq and Syria, we will become less secure here at home. And we've already seen a number of Australians go over there to participate in attacks, in terrorist activities, and there are more than 10,000 foreign fighters that are currently participating with ISIL. So this is a real issue for Australia's security, not just global security.
But is it semantics to try and differentiate between SAS, Special Forces soldiers, if we look at Australia's contribution, who will be alongside the Peshmerga, as you say, and Iraqi forces, inevitably going to be in combat roles, according to Andrew Wilkie. He thinks it's inevitable they will be, and be, taking on the ISIL threat. Why don't we call them combat troops? Because they certainly appear to be, and that's the view of Ian McPhedran this morning, as expressed to me.
Well, they're playing a strategic advisory role, and that is what the Prime Minister has already outlined. Look, we're also sending, as you know, a significant aircraft capability with the Super Hornets, with the early warning systems, with the air refuelling systems, and it's to be worked out what is exactly their role and if they're going to be directly involved in combat, and that's a decision that will be taken once those forces are in place. But right now, we want the Iraqi military and the Peshmerga to have the capacity, Kieran, to halt the advance of ISIS. And with the fall of Mosul, the second largest city in Iraq, something needs to be done, and something needs to be done quickly, and that's why Australia stands ready to help.
Ed Husic, in your view, do you think there's some doubt as to, well, certainly in the minds of the electorate, as to whether or not Australia is going to combat what's happening here with the deployment of 600 personnel?
I think people know quite clearly that something does need to happen in the face of what have been truly terrible events and horrific events within the Middle East, and particularly in terms of northern Iraq. I think that people also appreciate that where we can make a contribution, particularly through the humanitarian effort to date and also the sending of advisors, that we do that. And I think the other two important aspects that have occurred within the last 48 to 72 hours have been the bringing together of a coalition of countries within the region as well, which has been important, and President Obama has previously said the region needs to step up. I think that has been an important development, because ISIL did not just crop up overnight. They built up their strength over time, and they've been in effect proxies for some within the region, and it's important that we tackle it that way. And the other, I think, important contribution is the comments that you played a few moments ago from Defence Secretary Hagel, where he indicated that this isn't just a military response, but it needs to be a diplomatic, economic and policing response as well. I think that these are the type of mechanisms that do need to be deployed to tackle a threat such as what ISIL presents, and we do need to be broad-minded in tackling that and effective in doing so.
It's going to be expensive, Ed Husic, $500 million a year, the Australian deployment, that is.
These things do come at a cost, but I think people also have weighed up clearly that there is a greater cost in us not acting. And that if we fail to get a coalition of countries together, and if we fail to act in a timely way, that this will have ramifications. So clearly we have Australians that, for misguided reasons, have taken up an extremist path. They need to be dealt with, and as part of a broader response to what's going on, we have both the international response that we've just been talking about and touched upon, but we also have a domestic one as well, and these things need to happen in tandem. And yes, there will be a price tag, but it would be worse to ignore this threat and think that by saving dollars now that we've been able to achieve something. No, we haven't. We've deferred action, and I'd be worried about the human cost of that.
Josh Frydenberg, we saw the Paris summit this week, the 30 nations, including a number of Sunni majority countries like Saudi Arabia, supporting that statement, which said that all means necessary should be used to get rid of IS from the region. But they seem a bit more reticent about making a military contribution. Why is that, and is that defendable?
Well, I think you're right. The Arab League and a number of nations in the Middle East have been very forthright in their criticism of ISIL and their willingness to help stop its advance. And I know that the Prime Minister has already spoken to the Crown Prince of the United Arab Emirates, and he's obviously in regular contact with the new Prime Minister in Iraq, Haider al-Abadi, because they are willing to do everything they can to stop the advance of ISIL. As to what form their support takes, that will be worked out in due course. But this is not a short operation, Kieran. This is a medium to longer term operation, and we have to be patient. But I totally agree with what Ed said before. This is such an important mission. There's a humanitarian need on the ground. And I find, for example, the Greens' criticism of the government's actions here, sanctimonious in the extreme, because the Greens, on the one hand, are saying we need to be more generous to people who are the subject of persecution, and now when we are trying to do something to stop that persecution at its source with hard-edged military response, the Greens are nowhere to be seen. And I think Australians understand the reality of this threat, and if we do not stop ISIL's advance, then the number of adherents that they will get will increase. And those adherents, including Australians, will get training, will participate in atrocities, and then will come back to Australia and do harm to our people and to our interests. And that's the real issue.
We've got to go to a quick break. Back in just a moment with Josh Frydenberg and Ed Husick.
Visit the Tip Exchange to share your tips.
This is AIM Agenda. Thanks for your company with me, Ed Husick and Josh Frydenberg. It looks like the referendum for Indigenous recognition in the Constitution might now be set for 2017. Josh, there will be some, including some in your own party like Ken Wyatt, who won't be entirely happy with that. They wanted it before the next election.
Well, I think Ken understands, like all of us, that we've got to get this right, and we've got to make it a successful referendum, and the Prime Minister is certainly committed to that. I mean, in the history of referendums in Australia, only 8 out of 44 have been successful, and you need a double majority of votes across the country in a majority of states. So it's a very delicate process, and I think for us, the 1967 referendum, where more than 90% of people supported the change, which involved bipartisan support from both Prime Minister Holt and Gough Whitlam, is really the prototype for the referendum that the Prime Minister is determined to have. So the announcement will be made in the next few days, but we've got to get it right, and we've got to make the case publicly first.
It is a delicate process, isn't it, Ed?
Yes, it is, but it's one that's important that I think on the face of it a lot of Australians would support, that our Constitution, the most critical document of the nation, recognise the First Peoples, that it recognises that Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islanders had a rich history here before white settlement, and that we should be doing that we should be picking up a lot of the work of the expert panel that reported last year. 3,500 different submissions and a multitude of various face-to-face consultations picking up the views of the general public and saying that the Constitution should be amended. Obviously you need to get the timing on this right, but I think with the goodwill and, more importantly, the enthusiasm of everyone, we can work with the public in making sure that our document reflects the multitude of histories that have existed here in Australia, and recognise the First Peoples and ensure that it is rightfully removing elements of the Constitution that would cause concern to Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islanders.
Let's look at the G20 now, and the finance ministers of the G20 nations will be in Cairns this weekend. A big focus is profit shifting of multinationals. Of course, the IT major tech companies are mentioned regularly in this frame. Ed Husick, this has been something you have discussed and campaigned on and argued about for many, many months, years in fact.
And certainly Treasurer Hockey's recent ministerial statement to Parliament was welcome, in that it is now focusing the mind of the government on dealing with this issue. They did walk away on their election from a range of measures that we thought were important to deal with this matter. You can see the OECD today has released a report talking about injecting greater transparency in the reporting by multinationals of the tax they pay in different countries. That's important. We've clearly got the G20 there, and that is a critical mechanism to ensure that all countries actually deal with this, because there's no point Australia just dealing with this and other countries refusing to. But I think governments across the world, Kieran, recognise that with revenue becoming tighter, you can't afford to have this type of leakage of revenue with multinationals shifting profits and then reducing their exposure to tax in various jurisdictions. That really undermines your budget position. So, you know, certainly I think it's good that Treasurer Hockey's focused on it. Bit slow off the mark, but important that he gets to the finish line on this.
The question is, Josh Frydenberg. The question, Josh Frydenberg, is whether or not the US comes to the table on this one and agrees to the changes, because my understanding is that the companies concerned, they pay the tax necessary in the US, but not so forthcoming in the rest of the member nations or many of the member nations of the G20, Josh.
Well, Joe Hockey's taken the lead in this regard. He's actually put this issue on the agenda, and he is corralling the G20 finance ministers right as we speak on this issue. And you're right that there is a bit of reticence from the Americans, because a number of these multinational companies are American companies. But if you look around the world, this is an experience that states are having to deal with, not just Australia. How do we get a proper tax treatment of companies that make billions within our own jurisdictions but actually pay very little tax in that same jurisdiction? So we need to get better exchanges of information. I welcome this report from the OECD, but Joe Hockey is very determined to push this agenda through and to get the better tax treatment of these multinationals.
All right, finally I want to look at the Prime Minister holding performance reviews with his ministers. My colleague at Sky News, Chris Kenny, has got this exclusive this morning. It's the front page of The Australian. Tony Abbott has begun annual performance reviews of his ministry, holding one-on-one meetings. Josh, have you had one yet?
Yes, I have had one, even though I'm not in the ministry, a parliamentary secretary, but I have had one of those one-on-ones with the PM, and it was very useful because it's effectively a stock take, Kieran, of what has been done to date in particular portfolio areas. Mine is in the area of deregulation, but the Prime Minister is very focused as well on the forward agenda in each and every portfolio, looking at what can be done and how he can use his Prime Ministership to help drive that agenda. And it's a great contrast to what we saw was the dysfunctional and chaotic government under Rudd and Gillard, where the Prime Minister was darting from one issue to another every different day. And so Tony Abbott is very, very focused on what can be done in each particular portfolio.
Ed Husick, what grade do you think Josh would have come in for, in your view?
Oh, well, that was grade A spinning right there. I mean, I think, you know, claiming that this government has had smooth sailing, that is a tour de force by Josh Frydenberg on Sky this morning. I want the beanbag and the popcorn for the performance review of Joe Hockey. I mean, this budget is an absolute shambles. And the other thing overall is, how does Tony Abbott go judging his ministers when he's failed his key KPI? Key KPI would be keep your promises. How many promises have these guys broken in the 12 months that they've been there? No wonder when you look at the performance review that's displayed in opinion polling around the country, the public is marking this government down. But yeah, good on you, Josh. They should clone you, mate.
Kieran
If they
Ed
haven't cut the
obviously
funds
still
to the
thinks the
CSIRO,
carbon
they
tax
should clone
is in
you.
operation. He obviously still thinks
out
the
of
mine
time,
tax is
gentlemen.
in operation, and he's obviously not aware
We're
of
out
what
of
we've done to
time.
stop
I
the
don't
votes.
think I don't think Ed Husick's going to need his beanbag. I don't think they'll let you in. But anyway, gents, have a good time today. Appreciate it. A quick break, back in just a moment.